What we'll have now is 3 keynotes. I think great topics. Startups meeting established companies. Really, really happy to have the first speaker on stage. The speech is called Big Company Marketing versus Startup Marketing. I love that topic. Because I'm a marketer myself. When I started with my first company, I was like, let's do this, let's market. And the first thing I noticed was, number 1, they had no clue what marketing was. Number 2, they had no money for marketing. Number 3, no interest in traditional marketing. So it was really exciting. I'm really looking forward to the speech. Mike will be coming up stage in a couple of seconds. He spent some time at Procter & Gamble to move on to a startup accelerator and then to move to a venture fund. So I think he really knows what he's talking about. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, make some noise for Mike Bott. Hello, Mike. Bit more than that. Thank you. Hello, Mike. Welcome on stage. Enjoy yourself.
All right, how was everyone doing this morning? I've never given a presentation when a couple things happened. They asked people if they wanted to leave before I started, so now is your second chance to leave if things aren't going to go well. And 2, they offer you a shot immediately, so we'll see how this goes. But I think you're primed. As Daniel mentioned, my name is Mike Bott. I kind of have an interesting background, and I'm going to talk a little bit to kind of both sides of my background. As my slide here says, worlds collide in Slovenia, big company marketing and startup marketers. What can they learn from each other? If I saw correctly from the front row, most of you are startup folks, hands for startups. And I was surprised because it seemed like there were way fewer hands that went up when he said, who needs money for startups? So it might be early, but always as a startup, if you need money, raise your hand because people are always looking. All right, about me. So my background is kind of a weird mix. I have product management experience, brand management experience, big company experience, startup experience, and then roughly 2 months ago, I took the leap as my startups from my accelerator said to the evil side when I joined a venture capital firm. So interesting background. But I've worked with everything from zero marketing budget, where you just had to make sure the product was really good, and that's why people started using your service, to having a $50 million budget at Procter & Gamble. So everything in between. So regardless of what your pains are, I've probably felt your pains. The brandery itself is my role there was why I think they brought me to Slovenia to speak with you all. The brandery is one of the top 10 accelerators in the United States. We run a 4-month program and help about 10 companies go from sometimes it's an idea on a napkin, sometimes it's a very early product, to something that hopefully will be venture-backed. So literally, I've been in your shoes, I've helped people in your shoes, and hopefully this will be helpful. I'm basically going to go through 3 big chunks today. The first one is things you should be worried about if you hear this from your lead marketer, your CMO, whatever. I call that section CMO Know. So hopefully I'll get a couple chuckles when that comes up. The second piece is I'm going to talk about 5 things that startups can learn from big corporations, and then 5 things that big corporations can learn from startups as it relates to marketing. So hopefully there'll be a couple little morsels you can take with you, and I'm going to be around. So hopefully if you want to dig deeper on any of those issues, I'd be happy to talk to you, because in general, I just love marketing. I think it's fascinating, and obviously, as we all know, it's not just formulaic. So there's a lot of give and take. Shall we dive in? Yeah? All right. So CMO Know. When you might not have the right marketing leader on your team. And these things are generalizations, so they may not all be true for you, but they've just been observations that I think both in the startup space and in the big corporate space can be things to watch out for. Overheard, marketing is for the non-tech founders. Who here is non-technical? Who here has all the responsibility of your team then for making sure there are users on your platform? It's daunting, right? Just because you're not the one slinging code or moving pixels around doesn't mean the entire responsibility for having the product get into people's hands is on you. So make sure as a team that everyone understands that getting users is the whole entity's responsibility. It's all of your responsibility, because at the end of the day, if you have no users, you're not going to, it doesn't even matter what the product is, right? Second thing, we'll figure out the branding stuff later. Sir Steve Jobs is turning over in his grave thinking about that. Branding is something you need to do early on. Most startups that I talk to say, we'll build our product, we know what we want to build, and then we'll figure out that branding stuff later. Huge mistake, and I'll get into it in a little bit later, but As someone who ran an organization called The Brandery, we're helping startups, it's all about resource efficiency. Branding helps big companies be right more often than not. If you have fewer resources, wouldn't it be even more important to be right more often than not? The next CMO Know. If we build it, they will come. This is a Field of Dream references for those of you who aren't familiar. If you haven't seen this movie, go download it on Netflix or something like that. This whole concept of if we build something great, people have to come use our product. Not always the case, right? We'll figure out the marketing stuff later. This is all too often heard. Let's just get the product right, then we'll deal with the marketing stuff. And some of these images, I'm not really sure where they came through. I was jet lagged when I was putting them together, so the next one in particular. Numbers, math, oh, that's horrible. As a marketer, you need to be able to embrace the numbers. And if you're afraid of them, if you don't know how to use Excel or dive into something like that, maybe you need to brush up. And does anyone understand why I have rainbows and kittens and puppy dogs here? That's, I think, the general thought, oh, that's what marketers are. They're the rainbows and puppy dogs people. But no, you need to understand math to be a new age marketer. And then this is one that always gets me. I need more budget to acquire users. Well, if you found some inefficiency and we can dump money in, we know how many users that's going to generate, that's great, that makes sense. But just off the cuff, I need more money for marketing, I'm not going to buy that. As someone who's had zero budget, as I mentioned, to $50 million, it makes you a better marketer if you have to be smart and lean and efficient. This one killed me when I was at Procter & Gamble. Let's just adjust what we did last year. That's a really bad idea. So you're just going to say last year was that great and the world hasn't changed in a year, let's just do the same thing? The analogy I use is moving an aircraft carrier. And you have speedboats in your competition all around. We were chatting earlier about Dollar Shave Club. Who here is familiar with Dollar Shave Club? Check it out, dollarshaveclub.com. They're a competitor to Gillette. And it's basically a startup that said we can sell razors much cheaper, more efficiently. And a few years ago, they had this video go viral. And when they launched, I shared it with some of my colleagues at P&G, and they said, we don't need to worry about it. 6 months ago, I was meeting with a new hire marketer at P&G on the Gillette brand, and they said, hey, how do we compete with Dollar Shave Club? Well, it's first scrapping your plan from last year to really be able to do things differently and to think differently. So don't let someone else's plan or your plan last year, which may or may not have been good, inhibit your opportunity for success as a marketer. And then this one kills me as well. Our target audience is women between the ages of 20 and 65. What do women between the ages of 20 and 65 have in common? Maybe that they're all 20 once, but by and large, that's absurd, right? Even when I was working at P&G, I was working on the Olay brand, which is a female skincare brand. And they said, yeah, our target audience is women between the ages of 20 and 65. Is your grandma the same as you were right out of college? No, there's nothing, very little similar. So get even more specific. And then we'll figure things out. Let's just outsource marketing until then. This is one of the issues one of my recent companies said, yeah, we need to figure out our supply chain. And they have an interchangeable frame and lens system. So eyewear, they were just on Shark Tank a couple weeks ago in the States. And they said, we'll just outsource marketing until we have time to focus on it. Sales always solve your problems. If people are buying your product, the rest of the house could be in disarray, but at least you have people willing to spend money and put money in. And I can tell you now, wearing the venture capital hat, sales solve a lot of problems. They say a lot of good things about your business. So always try to do it internally. All right, let's dive into these couple lists I have here. So what can startups learn from big company marketers? And I saw most of you are startups, so some of these, you may think that's ridiculous, but I kind of thought a lot about this, and I've helped a lot of startups, and I think all these things are things that you should at least consider. So I often hear, what's your marketing strategy? And they give me a couple tactics. Know the difference between the two. And I've got my next slide will illustrate what the difference between strategies and tactics are. But one of the things big company marketers do really well is understand all the different layers of the cake. They understand the big strategy and then the little things that are making that happen. Write out your plan. Hold yourself accountable. Put building blocks together and say, hey, if I need to get 1,000 whatever, sales, followers, hits to my website, how am I going to manufacture those 1,000? And understand where they're going to come from. Yeah, the plan will be wrong the moment you write it down, but at least it's a starting point. At least you're thinking through it in a responsible way. And then hold yourself accountable. Look back and say, did this work? Why didn't it work? Right? There's a blog post talking about strategies versus tactics. I mean, what is it? CharlieSaidThat.com. And I thought this was a great illustration. The strategy, surprise attack. The tactic, jump like crazy and throw a spear very hard. Right? Your tactic is not your strategy. They're different things, right? So think through that as you're building out your marketing plan and how you're going to acquire users, because it's going to help you be better at tracking people down. Brand matters. I touched on this a little bit, but it's guaranteed to make you more resource efficient. Go through the process. Shoot me a note later. I think my Twitter handle is on here. Tweet at me, and I'll send you a presentation if you don't know how to put together a startup brand architecture. Because you'll be able to do it in 2 hours, and it's going to make all of your work better. The example I have here is Chore Monster. They were a startup that went through the brandery a few years ago. I serve on their board. It's basically a platform for kids and parents to make the task of doing chores easier. They've done phenomenally well. They've raised money. But what's interesting is when they started their business, literally it was a logo on a napkin. One of their founders is an amazing illustrator, as you can see by some of the work up here. And one of their founders, was great at drawing these monsters and been doing that with his kids. The other had kind of a tough upbringing, and the first time he was introduced to chores was when he was 14 years old. And they got together and they said, okay, let's build this platform to help kids and parents get through the chores easier. And as most startups do, they put a laundry list of features and functionality on the page and said, okay, we need to have these positive reinforcing features. And basically the way it works is I could say, okay, Tommy, my son, clean your room, empty the dishwasher, take the dog for a walk, and I'm going to give you these number of points. And then when you get a certain number of points, you can redeem them for an hour of Xbox. We can go watch a baseball game, whatever it is. And one of the things they had on the feature list was kind of negative repercussions. So I had 3 sisters growing up. I'm sure my parents would have been deducting points left and right for making my sister cry or whatever. I didn't do that all the time. I kind of sound like a monster. And when they were going through it, they said, you know what? We're not just about getting chores done in family management. We're about happier families. So their brand purpose, kind of that big thing that they're never going to really be able to tackle, was about happier families. And because they realized that about themselves, they were able to strip off 20% of the features that had to do with kind of the negative repercussions and deduction of points and the workflow that involved, kind of punitive elements. And so they were able to spend that 20% of their time focusing on the positive features. So branding literally changed their product and allowed them to focus on building the right pieces better. And then if you think about it, it adds to the stickiness, because me as a little 8-year-old isn't afraid to log in to see if dad has deducted points from me. So understanding who they were and thinking through their brand before they built the product saved them a lot of time and energy. Know your consumer. Talk to them a lot. I was joking with Daniel, or Daniel was joking with me rather, about startup. A big company marketer will go work at a startup and they'll say, okay, we need to do customer research, and that's going to cost us $10,000. And startup's like, yeah, right. Yeah, we don't have $10,000 to spend on market research. But there are different ways to talk to people. Go, depending on your product, go to a bar and talk to 10 people. One of the things, one of the kind of adages I love is, if you can't tell me the names of 5 people that are your target consumer, you're probably working on the wrong thing. You need to know these people very, very well, in and out. If you can't name 5 people, if you think you're building it for yourself or for 1 or 2 people, your market isn't big enough, you don't understand them well enough. I didn't realize how cryptic this image is. That's horrible. So build your profiles, write it down, share it with people. And like I said, you don't want to focus on 20 to 65-year-olds. Be very specific about why you're doing what you're doing for your consumer, and then build the product for them. Scale matters. Not all channels and vehicles are equal. This is something that big companies do really well, and being at P&G, when they're trying to figure out how to play in digital and use these different digital tools, as we all know, digital marketing can be there can be little chunks. You're spending a lot of time with potentially very little output. And historically, marketing has been, let's build a TV commercial and spend millions of dollars behind it, or build 2 print ads and disperse them everywhere. The amount of effort that goes into the creative is minimal, because then you just blast it out everywhere. Whereas we know digital marketing is much more intricate, and there are many, many, many more channels that take a lot more time. But be aware of that. Just because something's exciting and interesting and you have a great lead on it for some reason, make sure it's big enough to be worth your time. One of the things big company marketers think a lot about is working versus non-working dollars. And what that means is a non-working dollar is when you have someone create something for you. The working dollars are the money you spend to get it promoted, whether that's buying paid search or airtime for a TV spot or magazine insertions. Where are you spending your money? Is it building this glossy asset to put in front of people, or is it the energy to actually get the asset in front of people? So think about those, because that's big, and especially if you're selling into big companies, understand the mix of your spend that's directly going to be attributable to getting in front of their target consumer. Path to purchase. This is really interesting, because a lot of times startups, who here has the best product in the world that, of course, if someone knows about it, it's going to use it? At least one person's honest, right? Every startup believes they have the best thing ever, the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm sorry to break it to you, but it's probably not. Like, there's always something someone's doing that's satiating that need right now. So make sure you understand the steps that they're going to take. It's not going to be a one-hit wonder. You're going to have to do a few things to get them engaged and interested. If you don't know what path to purchase is, do a quick Google search. There's reams and reams of information about it. But basically, what are the steps I need to take? What little changes do I need to make to my consumer's psyche along the way to get them to actually do what I want them to do, whether it's buy something or engage in something or share something or whatever. Interact with the consumer according to where they are on the path to purchase. Your first message should be very different from your third message, or the message right after they purchase your product or engage with your product. Understand the friction points. What's the toughest thing for someone to get over? Big company marketers understand these most of the time. There are millions of options. People have less capacity to focus on something new than they ever had before. So make sure you understand the pieces. So in conclusion, these are the 5 things we can learn from big company marketers. Strategies versus tactics. Brand matters. Know your consumer. Scale matters. Don't focus too much of your time on these little things. And then the funnel, the path to purchase. All right, so all of you could probably give the second half of this presentation, what big companies can learn from startups. And speaking with folks last night, I think a lot of you are doing this well. Create content. Start with what's in your head and put it out there and make people's lives richer. Right? It's very, very simple. Whether that's write a blog, find someone find a blog that's interesting, that your target consumer is reading anyways, and offer to do a guest post. This stuff takes time, but it's also free relative to your time, right? Do the things that are inexpensive. This is how you build a user base even before your products launch. You become an expert in the field. I would say for all of you startup marketers, you know that the one thing you need to do is become the expert in your field, right? So for you non-technical founders out there, if you're not doing this already, start by becoming the expert. Write a blog. It may not even be tied to your product initially, but you're starting to build some traffic, because if you're really good and you understand XYZ, people that are looking for XYZ are going to come to your site, and then it's going to give you an audience to then tell them about this amazing new product that's going to solve their problems, right? Add value to your consumer. Think about that as adding value. It's kind of giving before you take. Because if you start thinking that way, it's going to change the way your business operates. And then one thing Facebook talks about, and I think is really smart, is why do they care and why do they share? Write something that's compelling enough that someone's going to want to share it with someone else, because that just means more eyeballs hit your product, right? So why do you care? Why do you share? And maybe smoke a pipe while you're typing at your old typewriter as well. All right, work the numbers. Leverage analytic platforms. Understand your lifetime value. Understand your user acquisition cost. And identify the friction points. And obviously friction points touched on both sides. But I think one of the things startups do much better than big companies is understand really what's going on in the sausage making and not just how it tastes at the end. You know, when I was at P&G, it was very easy for me to look at the share report and see how much we sold at Walmart or Target or the grocery store chains or whatever. But a lot of times I didn't understand all the little pieces along the way. And startups, by and large, do that because they have a heck of a lot of different platforms and data that's coming their way, and they're not afraid to look at it. Going back to the rainbows and puppy dogs and kittens, startups have to dig into the data because that's the only way they can afford to learn what's working and what isn't working. So definitely dive in to the numbers. Understand that if I put more money in to acquisition, is that going to increase my lifetime value? Am I going after the right people? Those sorts of things. Exploit inefficiencies. You want to dabble in a number of channels and then find one that has an amazing return. Some examples were probably 5-6 years ago, very few brands had mobile-friendly websites. And so Google paid search in mobile was much, much less expensive. Obviously, that's not the case anymore. But if you could go out there and build a mobile-friendly site and start pushing people, you could get clicks for pennies on the dollar what they would have been in a desktop environment. What startups do well is, a lot of times they'll go to their board and say, hey, I found an inefficiency. Facebook, install ads are way, way, way less expensive than most of these other vehicles. We know in the next few months it's going to make up the difference, and it's not going to be a deal, but let's dump a bunch of money in right now while there's an inefficiency. So it's playing the numbers games. It's some bit of arbitrage, saying what can we do right now to impact the company in a big way because I understand the data. All right? And the image I have here is burn the village down. It's kind of taking this Viking approach, the Vikings approach. They used to go into villages and pillage and burn the whole thing down. They didn't wait to see if it was still going to be good in 6 months. They took everything they needed right now. And obviously there are a lot of negative associations with that sort of behavior. But as a marketer, as a startup marketer, take that approach. Find an opportunity to just milk something for all it's worth because that vehicle is not going to be as lucrative down the road. All right. Fail early and often. So this image here is of the Blue Angels, which is kind of one of the show organizations of the naval aviation in the U.S. And they're feet away from each other, wingtip to wingtip. And one of the things they do very well is after every flyover, every sort of exposition, whatever it is, they talk about what didn't work well. And we're going to try some new things, but then we're going to debrief. One of my observations working at Procter & Gamble is you try a bunch of things. If it doesn't work, no one ever hears about it again. Who here has experienced that? It didn't work. Let's just sweep that under the rug. We're going to remove that from our work plan, and we're never going to speak about it again. That's not an approach to innovating. That's not an approach to doing things differently and finding some of those inefficiencies, right? So do things like A/B tests, knowing that a bunch of them are going to fail. Constantly optimize. You can't outsource and have someone else do something and it's not being optimized, right? Understand and share your failures because you're going to learn something from that. And frankly, you're going to encourage creativity. So it's super important to fail early and often and figure out how to praise it, right? Because it's not something we like to do generally in big companies is talk about failures. We just want to talk about the successes. And then occasionally do things that don't scale. I think this one's really interesting. Startups are really good at saying, oh, if we go to this conference or if we do this or that, obviously you can't replicate that over and over and over, but sometimes it'll help you learn something about your target consumer that you wouldn't have learned otherwise. So don't be afraid to do some things that won't scale. Do it yourself. I kind of laugh when I went to P&G after working in a number of startups. I was in Cincinnati. My digital agency was in Boston. My TV and print agency was in New York. My PR agency was in Miami. I didn't work with anyone around me. everything was outsourced, right? I don't believe that's the most efficient model for doing great things. Yeah, you want to surround yourself with world-class people and best in breed, whatever, but real iterative marketing needs to be done in-house. You need to develop those capabilities in-house. You need to have experts that understand how do we do an A/B test? How can we roll out different landing pages today and look at the data in 4 days? You're not going to get that if it's not done internally. So think about how can we pull at least some of the efforts in-house to become a more agile marketing team, because for every Gillette, they're competing with startups like Dollar Shave Club who aren't going to have a static homepage or landing page. They're going to be iterating, they're going to be testing a dozen different creatives at the same time. And how are you going to compete head-to-head with them? Because me as a consumer, I don't care if this is a billion-dollar brand that's well-established and has all this heritage, or if it's some small shop in LA that, they probably don't even have their supply chain lined up. All I care is at the end of the day, can I shave with the razor, right? So just in summary, the 5 things we can learn from startups: embrace all the numbers, add value first through content, exploit inefficiencies, fail early and often, and your digital presence shouldn't be outsourced, right? This is all 10 together, and I don't think they contradict each other too much, right? One image I've seen recently. Who here has seen this before? I think this is great, right? You can see the link on the bottom there. You can see Super Mario here, person who's a potential customer. We've got the flower. Give them fireball powers, right? Well, most people think your business makes your product. No, your business makes Super Mario, right? Awesome person who can do cool shit, right? Just think about that. It's not just about the features and functionality. It's about how you turn your consumer into a superhuman, right? That's what marketing is about. Does anyone know who this is? This is the first person I knew from Slovenia. Well, I don't know him. This is Rašo Nesterović. I was a Timberwolves fan, and he played in the NBA for a number of years. So I wanted to thank Rašo for his influence on my life, and thanks to all of you. Hopefully this was helpful.